Hey everybody, this is Jace Jenkins, Enterprise SE Manager out of Dallas, Texas, and he's going to walk us through a whiteboard comparing creation versus consumption when it comes to VxRail. What do you think, Jace?
Perfect. So one of the questions I get a lot from my customers and from my other SEs is, hey, we've pitched VxRail and the customer also wants a competitive quote on vSAN ready nodes or PowerEdge. And the first thing the customer noticed and the SEs notice is, oh my gosh, the price difference is crazy. And so I developed this whiteboard in response to that. Let's really compare and contrast the difference between you creating your own infrastructure and you consuming infrastructure. So you start out with just simply creating a table, create versus consume. And what we're going to do is go through the different parts and pieces that you would usually compare on a quote. So the very first thing is let's talk about the hardware. In both cases, on the create and consume side, the hardware should be identical. In this particular scenario, we quoted the customer a Dell R630, and we also quoted them 4 nodes of the 460F. Those two platforms, they are identical. Same per controller, same BIOS, same hard drives, etc. So you should be able to get the customer to agree that there's really no fundamental difference here. Past the hardware, that's where things change. So the first thing is let's talk about software. On the software side, what you get as a package from the VxRail is VxRail Manager to do all your major cluster operations, patching, adding nodes, removing nodes. You also get vCenter 6.0. You get vSAN Enterprise 6.2, and you get Login Site. These 3 titles here are all part of the VMware infrastructure and are going to be required on the create side. VxRail Manager, obviously that's a cluster manager, not going to be needed on create, but these 3 things are critical. Your customer is going to need to make sure that they include this when they're doing their apples to apples comparison. So the next thing I like to break out is value-added software. So value-added software are those Dell EMC titles that are bundled with the VxRail product. Those include RP for VMs and Cloud Array. Now, whether the customer finds a ton of value in these is sort of immaterial. It's a great discussion point, you should definitely have it, but to really get a true apples-to-apples comparison, they're going to need to compare that. The good news is we can show you some TCO studies that this isn't a deal breaker and usually is a small addition to the top, if not anything.
But regardless, they're having backup software one way or another.
Absolutely, yeah. This is, at least on the RP for VM side, they're going to need something. So then we next walk into support. From a support perspective, on the create side, if they start with Dell EMC nodes and maybe go to HP nodes, those are scenarios that we see happening, they're going to have to call each individual vendor for the support of the actual hardware. Obviously, they're going to have VMware on this stack, so they're going to need to call VMware for any software-related issues. If they leverage any of the value-added software, they're going to be calling Dell EMC for those value-added software components, and then any other applications they're going to have to call, which would be the same on ours.
Yeah, that's a key part right there with the hardware vendor, mismatch or mix and match, I guess I should say. If you have a strategy where you're going from down this create side, and you end up just saying, okay, we're going to consume ready nodes, you may end up having management or finance saying, okay, well, is that the right ready node? Let's compare prices across ready nodes, and then they force your hand into a different hardware vendor that you may not want. Now you're supporting multiple hardware vendors.
Absolutely, and that's really key because when you remove the value-added stack to this, it just becomes a pure server play at that point. So you're going to be comparing your out-of-band management cards, you're going to be comparing your firmware patching ecosystems, and none of the big value adds that really differentiate the product. And this is a knife fight, and this is something that Dell lives and has been doing for a long time, and it's hard. So if you stay over here, it makes it a little bit easier. On the support side, this entire stack is one call. You're just calling Dell EMC. Any issues in any of the stacks, they'll take care of. So I think that's a true big value differentiator. The other thing they're going to need to compare is on the maintenance side. On the maintenance side, the quote that you have sitting in front of them most likely only has hardware in it. Doesn't have any software titles. If they've not added the vSAN and the VMware components here or any of the value-added software, the number they're looking at is just hardware. they will need to include the software title maintenance here to make this an apples-to-apples comparison. The maintenance cost for VxRail is baked into one number for both the hardware and the software. So that's another difference. The final difference is what I call value added automation. So when it comes to value added automation, the customer is going to need to build all of that themselves, whether it's Puppet, Chef, Ansible, whatever they choose to do. This is going to have to be built by them, so it's not factored into any of the price. On the VxRail side, we have automation for day 1, 2, and 3 type workloads, and I can kind of show you that here in a minute. But what I like to categorize all of these is this is going to be your CapEx spend. Of course, we have DFS programs that can make this more OpEx, but just for the sake of this whiteboard, this is where they're going to spend their upfront money. And this is our OpEx spend. And when I say OpEx, this is operational expenditures, not really operating cash. This is where they're going to spend people time and money to do these type of operations. So let's look into the day 1 through 3 so you can kind of see what we provide there. So let's talk about the value-added automation, the day 1 through 3 categories. When I say day 1, I consider that stand-up or the day of creation. By automating your stand-up, the first thing you get is time to value. If it's completely automated, you can get this thing stood up in less than an hour, as opposed to a traditional infrastructure where you have to rack the servers, get the networking in place, stand up that array. That array could take a couple weeks to get stood up. This is all going to be done between 20 and 40 minutes, which is super fast. The second thing, by leveraging automation, and I think IT departments are going to love this, is standardization. You get a predictable outcome every time, and that's going to really help, especially in the support process, that you're not going to have a bunch of snowflakes. So those are the really 2 big things I see out of stand-up. What's really also important to know is all the different things we're going to build. So from a VMware infrastructure, we're going to stand up your vCenter, also your platform services controller. That's pretty simple stuff. Where I think it gets more complex is in the networking. And if you think about all the stuff that goes into networking of a VM environment, it gets pretty complicated. And not necessarily on the physical side, because that's just straight VLANs, but we're talking the virtual distributed switching, we're talking the virtual VLANs that go on, like the management VLAN, the vSAN, vMotion, the VM VLAN, all these kind of things are just set up and working for you. And in my experience, the networking's been the hardest part of setting up a new infrastructure.
Your favorite part isn't setting up VM kernel NIC ports?
No, not at all.
Okay.
No, that'll just be all done for you. Usually the second thing that takes most of my time is setting up storage. And because we're using a software-defined storage stack, vSAN is going to be set up all ready for you and all the disk groups that it needs. In addition, all the data stores will be created and ready to be consumed. What's really important here is all this is done in a short amount of time and you're production ready at the end. There's nothing else left to do besides creating your VMs and start consuming it.
Yeah.
Having said all that, I still think that this is a small part of the pie. I think really where the rubber meets the road is in day 2 type operations. Day 2 operations are everything past stand-up and before retirement. So things like making changes to your cluster, adding nodes, removing nodes. So let's take adding nodes. Simple 1-button add within VxRail Manager brings that node right into the cluster and ready for consumption. Where the people are going to get the biggest bang for the buck is around patching. And when we talk patching, you have to really put yourself in the shoes of the IT admin, all the extra work streams that go on when you do patch. So let's just take something simple like taking vSAN 6.2 to 6.5. If I was in their shoes, I'm gonna have to build a dev environment, I'm gonna have to put some workloads on it, I'm gonna have to make sure all my firmware levels are correct, and I'm gonna have to go through the process of upgrading it, watching it to make sure it's predictable. All this is going to be handled for you through the VxRail Manager patching process, and it's something you can completely take off their plate. Other things that are going to get patched are vSphere, and really the VMware ecosystem is going to get patched through this process. Not only that though, I mentioned the firmware and hardware components that need to be kind of checked through this process. We're also going to patch firmware. And today we do the BIOS, we also do the PERC controller, and very soon we're going to be able to do the firmware of the drives, the DRAC, and the GPUs. All this is just time. It's time that the customer doesn't have to spend on non-value added operations. So that's day 2. The final one is day 3, and that's retirement. So we started, we managed through the life cycle, now we're retiring those assets. The 2 work streams that I can think of here that the VxRail manager can help you through, or the VxRail system, is one, removing nodes. On the removing nodes, it's not a button within VxRail manager, but there is a scripted process. And then I also think a good work stream to talk about is repurposing nodes. I definitely think there's a use case as you evergreen these clusters that you're going to have the original cluster is maybe doesn't have enough horsepower, or you might want to repurpose it by ejecting it from the cluster, flashing it back to factory defaults, and then going through the stand-up routine to build, let's say, a test dev cluster, a tier 3 cluster. I think all those things built into the system and the way it's operationalized will save you time and money.
We even have some customers too that have mobile clusters, and VxRail gives them the opportunity to shut down that cluster appropriately and healthy, so that way it comes back up correctly.
That's cool.
There's a cluster shutdown button.
That's a new one for me, and I think you should add it. That's perfect. So when I see all of this, the day 1 through 3 work streams, at the end of the day, what I think you're saving is time, which obviously is money. Being able to reclaim your time and effort towards these non-business value functions will just make you more valuable to your business. So when we look back over here on the comparison and the create and consume, what I see here is what you're going to walk your customers through is really showing the delta between the sums here. Because at some point you started this conversation with VxRail costs this, and vSAN ready nodes costs that, and you can easily fill the gaps in to show the value. That's it.
Awesome. Thanks, Jace.
Yep, no problem. Thank you, Ryan.